Welcome to Nikki's Nightmares, where chilling tales come to life. In today's terrifying story, we descend into the haunted history of Gettysburg, the blood-soaked battlefield where over 50,000 soldiers fell during the Battle of Gettysburg in July of 1863. Cannon fire once thundered across Devil's Den. Field hospitals overflowed inside Pennsylvania Hall. The Farnsworth House Inn stood riddled with bullet holes as men died within its walls, and when the smoke finally cleared, something remained. Phantom footsteps echo across the rolling Pennsylvania hills. Shadowy soldiers pace the cupola of Gettysburg College. Ghostly drumbeats roll through the mist at dusk. Visitors report apparitions in Civil War uniforms, disembodied voices in historic buildings, and unseen hands that seem to reach through time itself. Is Gettysburg simply a preserved battlefield? Or is it one of the most haunted places in America, where the spirits of the Civil War still wander, searching for orders that will never come? If you love scary stories, paranormal encounters, and true horror experiences rooted in real history, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join me as we delve into the deep, dark, and the mysterious. The Battle of Gettysburg was fought from July 1st to July 3rd, 1863. 3 days that would change the course of the American Civil War and forever stain a quiet Pennsylvania town with unimaginable loss. By the time the fighting ended, more than 50,000 men were dead, wounded, or missing. It remains one of the bloodiest battles in American history, a turning point that halted General Robert E. Lee's invasion of the North and marked the beginning of the Confederacy's decline. Today, nearly 1 million visitors walk those same rolling hills each year. They come for history, for preservation, for remembrance, but many also come for something else. Because long after the smoke cleared, something remained. In early summer of 1863, the Confederacy believed momentum was on its side. Following victories at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, General Robert E. Lee reorganized the Army of Northern Virginia into 3 corps under A.P. Hill, Richard S. Ewell, and James Longstreet. Cavalry operations were led by J.E.B. Stuart. On June 3rd, Lee began a secret march north through the Shenandoah Valley, using the mountains as cover. His goal was bold: relieve pressure on Virginia, supply his army off northern land, and perhaps force a war-weary Union into negotiation. Meanwhile, the Union Army of the Potomac, first under Joseph Hooker and then, as of June 28th, under newly appointed General George Meade, moved north in pursuit. Neither army fully knew where the other was. On June 30th, Union cavalry under General John Buford rode into Gettysburg, then a modest town of about 2,400 residents, known mainly for its carriage industry and 2 colleges, the Lutheran Theological Seminary and Pennsylvania College. There was nothing remarkable about Gettysburg that day, but that would change within hours. Confederate infantry under General John Pettigrew approached the town on a reconnaissance mission. Popular legend claims they were searching for shoes. In truth, they were scouting. When they encountered Union pickets west of town, the collision was inevitable. On July 1st, the battle began. For 3 relentless days, fighting tore across hills, forests, rocky ridges, and even the streets of Gettysburg itself. Cannon fire shook the earth. Musket volleys cracked through the air. Men fell by the thousands. By the end of July 3rd, nearly 1/3 of the soldiers engaged had been lost. On July 4th, both armies remained on the field in eerie silence. When neither side advanced, Lee understood. His invasion had failed. With over 28,000 Confederate casualties and dwindling supplies, retreat was the only option. That afternoon he began the long withdrawal back to Virginia. Meade did not pursue, and behind them they left a nightmare. Bodies littered the fields, swelling and decaying in the July heat. Homes and churches were converted into field hospitals. Blood soaked into carpets, stained walls, and ruined books used as makeshift pillows. One resident recalled wounded men laid side by side in their halls and rooms, the floors saturated beyond cleaning. A Federal soldier wrote of corpses swollen to twice their original size, some propped against fences, faces twisted into fixed expressions that seemed almost inhuman. Burial parties worked tirelessly, but the scale of death was overwhelming. An anonymous New Jersey soldier described the scene as men lying like sheaves bound by the reaper, in fields, behind fences, along streams, wherever the battle had raged. It was devastation on a scale the town had never imagined, and perhaps never fully escaped. Because in places where suffering is that concentrated, where fear, pain, and violence crest in waves of human desperation, stories begin to form. Visitors to Gettysburg report phantom footsteps across Devil's Den, the distant roll of ghostly drumbeats at dusk, the crack of unseen musket fire drifting through early morning fog, apparitions of uniformed soldiers wandering the battlefield, some confused, some searching, some vanishing without sound. In historic buildings, staff and guests describe doors opening on their own, sudden cold spots in the summer heat, shadow figures in hospital rooms that once overflowed with the dying. Many believe these are the restless echoes of soldiers reliving their final moments, imprints of terror burned into the land itself. Gettysburg is undeniably a turning point in American history, but it is also something else, a place where history and hauntings intertwine, where the past does not feel distant, and where, when the sun sets over those quiet Pennsylvania hills, the silence does not always mean peace, because some battles never truly end. Pennsylvania Hall. Within the town of Gettysburg stands Gettysburg College, known in 1863 as Pennsylvania College. Today the campus appears peaceful, brick buildings, open lawns, students walking to class beneath old trees. It feels ordinary, almost gentle. But in July of 1863, that same ground trembled beneath cannon fire. At the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, the college consisted of only 3 brick buildings, housing just over 100 students. When the battle erupted, the campus found itself directly in the path of war. Those quiet academic halls were transformed almost overnight into field hospitals. Classrooms became operating rooms. Dormitories became wards for the wounded and dying. And nowhere carries that weight more heavily than Pennsylvania Hall. Constructed in 1837 and often referred to as Old Dorm, Pennsylvania Hall once housed students. Today it contains administrative offices. Its white columns stand tall and dignified. But during the battle, the building was seized by Confederate forces. It served not only as a field hospital, but also as a lookout post. Officers, including General Robert E. Lee, reportedly used the cupola at the top of the building to observe the progress of the fighting. That cupola is still there, and on certain nights it is said that figures can be seen pacing inside it. Students and staff have reported the silhouettes of soldiers moving back and forth in the tower. Some believe they are sentries, men once posted to guard General Lee or relay battlefield messages. Their forms are often described as shadowy but solid, pacing with purpose, as if still awaiting orders that will never come. One student living roughly 50 yards away from Pennsylvania Hall claimed that he and his roommate watched a figure in the cupola over the course of several nights. On one occasion, the figure began gesturing wildly, as though trying to signal someone below. Thinking someone might be trapped in the tower, the student called out. The figure vanished. Campus security searched the building. It was empty. But it is the memory of the field hospital that seems to have left the deepest imprint. Records from the time describe blood splattered across floors and walls as surgeons operated without anesthetic. The most common treatment for bullet wounds was amputation. Outside the makeshift operating rooms, those beyond saving were laid aside to die. The cries, the groans, the desperate pleas. It is impossible to fully imagine the sounds that once echoed through those halls. Perhaps that is why, decades later, the building seemed to remember. Author Mark Nesbitt recounted a chilling incident involving two college administrators working late one night on the 4th floor. When they finished, they stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 1st floor. Instead of stopping, the elevator passed it, descending into the basement. The doors opened, but the basement storage room was gone. In its place stood an 1863 operating room, blood-splattered walls, wounded soldiers lying across the floor, doctors and orderlies moving in silence, their clothing stained dark. The scene was chaotic, yet utterly soundless. Frozen in shock, the administrators repeatedly pressed the button, desperate to close the doors. Just before they shut, one of the spectral orderlies reportedly looked up, directly at them, as if asking for help. The elevator doors closed. When they reopened, the basement had returned to normal. Both men were deeply shaken, yet they continued working in the building. The only change? Whenever they worked late again, they chose the stairs. Across the campus grounds, sightings are not limited to Pennsylvania Hall. Students and faculty frequently report phantom soldiers walking silently along the paths near the building, crossing the courtyard between Musselman Library and Glatfelter Hall, or appearing in dormitory stairwells. These apparitions often look fully solid, Union or Confederate uniforms clearly visible, until they step through a doorway or simply dissolve into nothing. Glatfelter Hall carries its own quiet legend. A woman in white has been seen wandering its upper floors or standing in the windows late at night. She is described wearing a flowing dress or nightgown, sometimes holding a candle or lantern. Some believe she may have been a nurse who tended the wounded in 1863. Others think she belonged to a later generation of the college. But nearly every report shares one detail. Her presence carries an overwhelming sense of sorrow. The dormitories are not untouched. Students have reported unexplained knocks on doors and windows, lights flickering without cause, cold spots in still air, footsteps echoing through empty hallways, objects shifting or being thrown. Stevens Hall, in particular, is often mentioned in whispered stories. Crying heard in the night, shadow figures in mirrors, and the persistent feeling of being watched. Gettysburg is not simply a battlefield, it is a place where history bled into the walls. And perhaps in Pennsylvania Hall, time did not move on as cleanly as we like to believe, because some nights the past still walks the cupola, still waits in the basement, still looks up, hoping someone will finally answer. The Devil's Den. The legend of Devil's Den did not begin with ghosts. It began with blood. On July 2nd, 1863, the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, the rocky outcropping at the base of the Round Tops became one of the most savage fighting grounds on the entire battlefield. But even before cannon fire split the Pennsylvania sky, the place already carried a reputation. Long before soldiers ever climbed those boulders, local lore claimed the tangled maze of stone had been a Native American hunting ground. Some spoke of an ancient conflict there, a forgotten clash sometimes referred to as the Battle of the Crows. In 1880, Gettysburg writer Emanuel Bushman described the area of the Round Tops and the so-called Indian Fields as a place of many unnatural and supernatural sights and sounds. Early settlers, he wrote, told stories of ghostly figures, of strange cries echoing at night, what they described as phantom war whoops drifting across the hills. Some even insisted that ceremonies had once been performed among the rocks. Bushman went further in 1884, suggesting the scattered boulders might have once formed part of a towering pyramid, destroyed by some violent blast. It is almost certainly doubtful. But the claim reveals something important. Even before the Civil War, Devil's Den was already wrapped in myth. The name itself may have predated the battle. Letters home from soldiers described it as desolate, ghostly, ominous. Some believed the massive rocks concealed the entrance to a cavern. Standing there today, one can understand the illusion. The crevices plunge downward into shadow so deep it feels as though the earth itself is hollow beneath your feet. Another legend claimed the area was infested with snakes, and that one massive serpent eluded hunters for years. They nicknamed it the Devil. The rocks, they said, were his den. Whatever the origin of the name, by July of 1863, Devil's Den was already considered strange ground. Then the war came. On the morning of July 2nd, General Robert E. Lee ordered a coordinated assault on the Union flanks. Longstreet's corps was to strike southward toward the Round Tops. Divisions under John Bell Hood and Lafayette McLaws would press against the Federal left. But confusion and delays plagued the Confederate movement. There was no guide. Troops marched, countermarched, and exhaustion set in. By the time they formed their lines, Union General Daniel Sickles had already repositioned his men forward into the peach orchard, stretching his line dangerously thin. Brigadier General Andrew A. Humphreys curved his division back toward Devil's Den, while Brigadier General John Henry Hobart Ward held the den itself, the far end of the Union line. And then the attack began. Before the Confederates could reach the rocks, they had to cross what we now call the Triangular Field. Wave after wave surged forward, Texans, Arkansans, Alabamians, Georgians, clashing with Union soldiers from New York, Maine, and Pennsylvania. Cannon fire tore through the advancing lines, but still they came. When Texas regiments climbed the slopes, the 124th New York met them head-on before being forced back. Alabama troops poured into the boulder field, pushing through deadly crossfire. The fighting became fragmented, chaotic. Lines dissolved into regiments, then into individuals. Men ran from rock to rock, firing blindly. The terrain shattered order. Every crevice became an ambush. Every shadow concealed a rifle barrel. The area earned a brutal nickname, the Slaughter Pen. Bodies fell among the stones. Some tumbled into the narrow gaps between them. Blood soaked the granite. The Confederates briefly seized the ridge. Federal forces countercharged. Maine and Pennsylvania troops forced them back. Then came another surge, Texans and Georgians pressing forward again. Confederate soldiers reached abandoned Union cannons and turned them toward the retreating Federals, only to find no ammunition. George Bernard, a Texas color-bearer, planted his flag atop the highest rock and was struck by a Union shell. By evening, after hours of relentless fighting, the Confederates held Devil's Den. But the cost lingered long after the gunfire stopped. Soldiers assigned to stand guard among the rocks that night later spoke of the oppressive stillness, of sharing the darkness with the unburied dead. Days later, when Union forces returned after the Confederate defeat, they found bodies scattered in every direction. One soldier recalled that some of the fallen had clawed at leaves and grass in agony, their mouths filled with soil. They had literally bitten the dust. Rain fell that afternoon, heavy and unrelenting. The already bloated bodies swelled and decayed. Some Confederate dead remained unburied for days, perhaps weeks. Others were said to have been pushed into the deepest rock crevices, swallowed by the den itself. And that is when the ghost stories truly began. Not long after the war, 2 hunters reportedly became lost near the rocky ridge. One saw a dim figure standing atop the boulders. The man gestured silently, pointing the way. When the hunter turned back to thank him, he was gone. In the early 1970s, a woman photographing the den described encountering a barefoot man with long, dirty hair and ragged clothing. He told her calmly, "What you are looking for is over there," and pointed behind her. She turned for only a moment. When she looked again, he had vanished. Weeks later, another photographer developed film taken at the den and found the image of a similar man on the exposed frame, though no such person had stood there at the time. Many Confederate soldiers who fought here were Texans, frontier men, often unkempt, often without proper shoes. Is the barefoot figure one of them? Visitors have reported seeing a ghostly rider who disappears without a trace. Others claim to hear distant gunfire, men shouting, echoes that carry across the rocks with no living source. Some speak of cameras failing in the nearby triangular field, batteries draining, footage corrupted, images distorted. Skeptics dismiss it. Equipment fails everywhere, but the stories persist. Emanuel Bushman wrote of unnatural sounds long before the battle. The war added hundreds of violent deaths to a place already steeped in legend. If suffering leaves an imprint, if trauma stains the land, then Devil's Den has had more than enough. Stand among the boulders at dusk. Listen carefully. The wind moves through the crevices in a way that almost resembles breath, and sometimes it does not feel like you are standing there alone. The Farnsworth House Inn. Among its most infamous locations stands the Farnsworth House Inn, built around 1810. What began as a simple brick home has endured more than 2 centuries of war, death, and whispered stories. Today it operates as an inn and tourist landmark, but beneath its polished floors and restored walls, something older remains. The land itself was first owned by Reverend Alexander Dobbins, an Irish-born frontier pioneer who arrived in the colonies in the 18th century. Born in 1742, Dobbins became a respected minister and early settler in the area. His legacy still echoes through Gettysburg, most notably at the Dobbin House. The parcel that would later hold the Farnsworth House passed from his hands to John F. McFarlane, the home's first resident. McFarlane lived there until his death in 1851. Afterward, the Bank of Gettysburg took possession, and over the years the property changed hands several times. But it was July of 1863 that permanently altered the house's identity. During the Battle of Gettysburg, the Farnsworth House was overtaken by Confederate forces. Like many civilian buildings in town, it was transformed into a makeshift field hospital and headquarters. Wounded soldiers were carried inside, blood stained the floors. Surgeons worked by lamplight. Outside, the thunder of artillery shook the walls. Confederate sharpshooters were positioned within the structure, using its vantage point to target Union troops crossing near Cemetery Hill. On the third day of battle, Union soldiers stormed the building, killing the snipers stationed inside. Even today, visitors are shown the side of the house where over 100 bullet holes remain, physical scars left behind by that violent clash. After the war, the building survived. It endured. Eventually, in the 20th century, it was operated by the Black family under the name the Sleepy Hollow Inn, who famously advertised the 135 bullet holes riddling its brick exterior. In 1972, the Schultz family purchased the property and restored its historical identity as the Farnsworth House Inn. They remain its caretakers to this day, but according to the Schultz family, the house was never truly empty. They believe at least 16 spirits inhabit the inn, soldiers who never left, presences that linger in rooms once used as operating tables and triage stations. Guests and staff report disembodied breathing, low grunts, whispered voices, and the heavy scent of cigar smoke drifting through otherwise empty corridors. One particular room, known as the Sarah Black Room, has drawn unsettling attention. Photographs taken from the street below have captured what appears to be a figure standing in the window, staring outward. No one inside, no explanation, just a shape, watching. In the dead of night, from the attic above, guests have reported the faint, unmistakable sound of a jaw harp playing, soft metallic notes echoing through the dark. The music is believed to belong to a young soldier, still at his post, still waiting. Phantom footsteps pace the stairs. Employees describe the sensation of someone walking directly behind them, heavy boots striking the wood. When they turn, no one is there. In the dining room, shadow figures gather at the edge of vision, dark silhouettes that dissolve the moment they are noticed. Guests have awakened to feel the mattress dip beside them, as though someone has sat down carefully at the edge of the bed. The weight is real. The presence is undeniable. But the room remains empty. Perhaps the most notorious spirit is said to be an older woman, a cranky cook dressed in period clothing. She roams the kitchen and pantry, inspecting shelves as if planning supper. Staff claim she pulls at their apron strings, pushes them unexpectedly, and occasionally knocks items from their hands. Of all the spirits said to reside here, she is considered the most aggressive. The Farnsworth House Inn stands today as one of Gettysburg's most visited paranormal destinations. Tourists arrive hoping for an encounter. According to its owners, they rarely leave disappointed, because in this house, you don't have to search for the spirits. If you stay long enough, they come to you. The story ends here, but the terror does not. Join me again, like, comment, and subscribe if you dare.